It's interesting that they haven't really thought through it. I mean, they grab a cliche. They just think it's a cool cliche because others have used it. And then they don't really think through and say, oh, wait, I have a terribly inconsistent, incoherent perspective here. They haven't really thought through that. And I guess we're helping them.
They haven't. And this is true with so many things that people raise against Christianity, Kevin, that your listeners are going to run into. And so that's why this opening question is so easy. And by the way, you don't have to be committed to go the distance and go to the gospel. I mean, who knows where it's going to go?
Yeah.
You're taking the opportunity that you have that's just in front of you to what I call do a little gardening. It's not a harvest. It's gardening. You're trying to move somebody forward. And what I hope is going to happen in those kinds of occasions, even if they're shorter, is that I may have done the way you back to your jiggle word, maybe I've jiggled their worldview a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe now they're going to be thinking, that's not as smart as an idea as I thought it was. And the Holy Spirit now is something to work with them on even when you're not there, because you put that stone in their shoe.
Welcome, friends, to the Generations broadcast. Kevin Swanson, your host, with you today, and we are coming back to a subject that is near and dear to my heart, so crucial that Christians be ready to share their faith and to give an answer to those who ask about the hope that is within them, but do it with meekness and fear, with humility and fear of God, reverence for God. And we pray that our listeners and all Christians be equipped to that end. And I don't think this is just for the people getting their master's in divinity or their master's in apologetics from some mainstream university or a Christian seminary, but this is for all of us. And so that's the goal. The goal is that we are equipped. Our children are equipped. And so here's a excellent book that could really help us in that regard. It's called Tactics, a Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions by our guest today, Greg Koukl, who joins me on the Generations broadcast. Greg, welcome. So good to have you here today.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Thanks.
Yeah. When did you get started with this vision to bring apologetics to the rank and file?
Well, I guess to the rank and file is the key there, because I started apologetics fairly early. I became a Christian in 1973 during the Jesus movement, and very quickly was, in a certain sense, out on the street talking to people, just walking through Westwood Village. I was a student at UCLA at the time, and lots of people were happy to talk about spiritual things during that time, and I got in a lot of discussions, and I realized I wasn't entirely up to the task. And there were a lot of questions that not only they had, but I had as well. So that drove me into studying people like Joshua McDowell and Francis Schaeffer and C.S. Lewis and the like, just to bone up for myself. But then as time went on, I realized this is not only is it a real interest that I have, but it's also a real need in the body of Christ. And so as I had more opportunities to talk to other people and to even to speak at churches and stuff like that, which started fairly early for me, my own local church and then others in my community, I realized that the body of Christ needs more of a stronger understanding to be able to navigate amidst the challenges that they're facing, because my conviction is that Christianity is actually true, not just true for me, but true the way gravity is true, and I have to make that qualification a lot of times. In other words, if you don't believe in gravity, you're not going to float away. It's the way the universe is, and Christianity is true in that sense. That's our claim. Now, of course, that needs to be defended, and so I realized that Christians a long time ago were not really capable of that, and there weren't back then, not many websites. There weren't any websites because there's no World Wide Web. And when Stand to Reason started in 1993, no web. And there were radio shows, and I was doing one in Southern California, but Los Angeles area. But we didn't have any of the kinds of things we have now. But there's been an explosion of that, and not just in obviously exposure through websites and podcasts like yours, but also through books and through other apologists. So it was 32 years ago when Stand to Reason started, when they started that with some other people, and I never imagined it would turn into what God has made it into. I mean, we were talking earlier that we just had a conference for young people in Minneapolis, just got back yesterday. It was this weekend. And we had 4,100 students and student leaders and parents there. I mean, that's the largest church in the state of Minnesota, and we filled it to the gills. So something's going on here, Kevin.
Yeah.
And
I think the young people are just showing up, and they're wanting reasons. They want to hear the truth. They're tired of living in the relativistic world where there is no truth. Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think they're open and they want to know this. Now, I guess it's my perspective that a young Christian, 18, 19, 20, 22 years of age, should be able to give a reason for the hope that is within them. With a philosophy professor from Denver University sitting on a flight out of Denver into Dallas, they should be able to do it and not freak out. I mean, I think that's part of my goal in some of the teaching. I'm doing a worldview class, an apologetics class with the young people in our church. We had like 22. I mean, at first I thought I get 4 people. I think we got 22 people come over to my house on Monday evenings. My wife's doing chili tonight for the 7th class. So I'm just like amazed at how these young people are just eager to hear this message. And I guess, I have the confidence in the sense that we need to train these young people to be comfortable with a conversation with a philosophy professor who does not share their faith. You agree with that?
Yeah, that needs qualification, though, because a lot of people, and this, especially people not schooled in apologetics, and especially if they're younger and it's a professor in philosophy. I mean, that's pretty daunting.
It's hard.
I do think there is a bridge. Yeah, well, there is a bridge. And this is one of the reasons I wrote the book Tactics that you mentioned, to provide a missing bridge from the content to the conversation, or from the scholarship to the relationship. And what I think is really apropos regarding your concern that you just raised here, Kevin, is that you don't have to be a philosophy major or a theology expert in order to use the tactical approach to get you involved in conversations. In fact, the promise I make in the book, and I made it yesterday when I gave, or maybe Saturday, I guess, when I gave the breakout a session on that at the big conference, is I said, I'm going to give you a game plan that will allow you to converse with confidence in any situation, no matter how little you know, or how knowledgeable or aggressive or even obnoxious the other person happens to be. So the game plan spans the range of knowledge. A brand new Christian can begin employing this to begin to be effective, even if they don't know much. And I know that sounds like, well, that's hard to believe, but I have had so many people come up to me, Kevin, and told me, no matter what their circumstances, whether they're a younger student, and we're shooting for in these events, middle schoolers and high schoolers, not college kids. I mean, they're welcome, obviously, but I'm talking younger 12, 13, 14-year-olds that are able to take this material, engage with people, and what the consistent phrase that I hear from people is, this book changed my life. And in a way, I mean, that's very humbling and flattering for me, but I'm not surprised, because over the years, as I began to put these concepts together, it changed my life too in the way I was able to engage. And it's not that hard.
Big time. Big time. Goals. One of the verse that keeps coming back to me is Proverbs 26, I think it's verse 5. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceits or wise in his own eyes. And so, in other words, one of your goals, I think it's good to think of your goals, and I'm putting this to you as to what your goal is. Obviously, you'd love to have, the professor or whoever it is you're having the conversation with saved, right? Seeing his sin, seeing his need for Jesus and all the rest. But it seems like, just to jiggle him a little bit, to jiggle the cage a little bit, ask some questions. In other words, if that young person realizes that, he could really perhaps challenge the fool in his folly a bit, lest he be wise in his own conceits, by the time that plane lands in Dallas, could that kind of thing happen? Is that part of this?
Yes, definitely. In fact, I had I don't know if you have time to get into it, but I had a conversation with a waitress in Seattle one morning. I'd worked on Friday night and all day Saturday there at a conference, and I was really tired on Sunday morning. There were other speakers, but I'd really worked hard. And then I had to get up early to go to a church to preach. And I'm not a morning person. I didn't want to talk to anybody about anything, certainly not spiritual things. It's too much for me at dark 30, on my way out. And this waitress began to, she was just way too energetic for me. At that time of the morning, right? And so she I asked her, she asked me why I was there, and I just thought I wanted her to go away, right? So I said, I'm going to go preach in a church. I figured that would get rid of her. But she said, oh, that's good. And I didn't understand why that was good. And so I said, well, are you a Christian? Maybe she is a Christian. Maybe that's, oh, no, I used to be a Christian, but now the universe takes care of me.
Oops.
And I'm thinking, what the heck does that mean? So I just asked her what she meant by that. And there was a couple of more, the conversation went on a couple more minutes. And she kept saying these kind of new agey kinds of things that I couldn't make any sense out of. But I just asked her for clarification. Now, as we'll get into it, this is actually the first step of the game plan, is getting clarification on views. And I wasn't there to refute her. I wasn't even, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't want to talk about Jesus. I want to just get my coffee and wake up. And so then she walked away, and I thought I had no impact on her at all. All I was doing was asking questions, just because I couldn't make sense out of the things she was saying. But I was very polite to her. And then when she came back at the end to bring me her bill, she said, nobody's ever asked me questions about my view before. And then she said, and it got me thinking.
Wow.
And it got me thinking.
There you go.
Now, what's key about this this engagement here, Kevin, is that, first of all, you mentioned a few moments ago about jiggling the professor's thinking, and I call that putting a stone in their shoe. It's a very simple, just to get them thinking and annoy them in a good way a little bit. And here is a situation where I wasn't even trying to engage. I was trying not to. I was trying to get rid of her because I just wanted to be left alone. And nevertheless, by using a few questions at the front end, just to get clarification, because I was so confused, that all by itself got her thinking. It put a stone in her shoe. And it is interesting, too, that she prefaced the statement, it got me thinking, which is what I'm trying to do with the game plan, though it wasn't particularly trying to do that morning, is that she said, nobody has ever asked me questions about my view before. And a core part of the game plan, which makes it really easy for beginners, if the professor sits next to them, PhD in philosophy, if you're just asking questions of that person and you're trying to get clarification on the view, that engages you productively in a conversation without any risk for the believer.
And
this is really important.
Yeah, you call this the Columbo method. And now what's interesting is my wife watched Columbo back in the 1970s, but I never did. So explain to those of us who are ignorant about Columbo how this works.
Well, he's actually the number one most recognizable TV icon of all time. But, TV is kind of passé now with all cable. Right. And he was a detective who was a murder detective. Peter Falk played him. And for maybe your younger crowd, if you saw Princess Bride, which is kind of an old movie, a lot of people watch it, he was the grandfather telling the story to the son, that actor, and that opens up the whole story, Princess Bride. But anyway, Peter Falk plays this apparently bumbling detective who's the murder detective, and he's walking around with a trench coat and a cigar and no pen to take notes. He's got a bum and all. This guy doesn't look like he can think his way out of a wet paper bag, right? He's stupid, but he's stupid like a fox, because his signature technique is, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And so he starts asking these questions. And as the episode unfolds, it's all the question asking that he does that doesn't seem intimidating because he's coming in under the radar. That is what gives him all the information he needs to nail the murderer. And the way this show developed is the murder is already done, and you know who the killer is. So the viewer knows who the killer is, but the killer thinks he's completely clear. Nobody's going to figure this out, especially this bumbling detective. So what we see with Columbo are two different things. We see the questions, and that's key to the entire game plan. And secondly, we see a posture, which is not threatening. Which is head scratching. I don't know. There's something about this thing that bothers me, kind of thing, to mock or to imitate Columbo a little bit, and so people don't have their guard up when you're asking questions.
Yeah,
and by asking questions, you're getting a lot of information from them. You're being polite. You're drawing them out. But when you ask questions, Kevin, you know this. You're not at risk.
Sure.
Yeah. Because you're not making
no
any
stress
claim.
for you, really. You're not stressed out because you're not giving any answers.
Exactly, especially if you know the question to ask. And the basic tactic has a couple of questions. There's three maneuvers for the Columbo tactic, which is the game plan. Now, the book has a lot of other tactics in it. Tactics with names like Just the Facts, Ma'am, and Rhodes Scholar, and What a Friend We Have in Jesus, and Inside Out, and things like that. And these are all maneuvers in conversation that will help you, but they are all geared to the game plan proper, which I call the Columbo tactic, which is a few steps with certain questions that help draw the person out and help you make your point effectively, even though you're not getting in an argument with someone.
So the first thing you do is identify what they think and what they mean by that. So you get some clarification going. You're developing some of their perspective.
So that's the first
step.
Thanks for that. That's the very first step of the game plan. When anybody finds themselves in a circumstance where they want to venture out a little bit and try to have a spiritual impact, maybe it's hard to tell what's going to happen in any conversation, or especially if they're being challenged about their own convictions, the very first step of the game plan is to gather information. It's just to gather information. So, and the model question, I think you just offered it, is what do you mean by that? Now, it's a model question, so it can be expressed in lots of different ways. So if somebody says, look, belief in God is really stupid. It's really dumb to believe in God. Well, I'm not going to try to give evidence for God's existence to disprove them. I'm already in a combat situation. They're a conflict situation. Instead, I'm going to ask, what's stupid about it?
Or what do you mean by God? Or what do you mean by God?
Well, that's another one.
That's another question, right?
Well, there you go. What do you mean? There's a couple ways you could go, but my first response will probably be what's stupid about it. If somebody says, "Hey, I don't believe in God," and I say, "Well, what kind of God don't you believe in?" That's very important, because if they don't believe in a God with a gray beard who's up in space somewhere or on the throne, well, I don't believe in that God either. But notice the first step is just probing to get clarity. On their view, whatever it happens to be, or on their challenge to you. I pull a trick at this point when I'm talking about this with an audience. I pull a trick on it when I'm in a church. I say, by the way, does everybody here, does this church take the Bible literally? And of course, everybody, their hands go up and people say, yeah. I said, so Jesus is a stick then? Huh? Well, he said, I'm the vine and you are the branches. I guess we're all sticks. Well, that's not what we mean. So you fell into a trap. Why? I tell them. Because when I said, do you take the Bible literally? Instead of saying, yes, you should have asked the question, what question? And that was the one I just offered it. Well, what do you mean by literally? Depends what you mean by that. Do you believe in evolution? That's another trick question. No, we don't believe in that. Oh, you don't think things change over time?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, then you do believe, or don't you believe? Tell me. Now the Christian's in a tough spot because he didn't ask for clarification. What do you mean by evolution?
Right.
Which kind of evolution do you have in mind? Right. So there's an example of how that can work. When somebody says, well, the Bible's been changed. A lot of people say that. Okay, well, what do you mean it's been changed? How do you think it's been changed? In other words, let them talk more about the nature of their objection. This does a couple of things, Kevin. For one, it gives you more information about what the nature or substance of their objection actually is. But it helps you understand their view, but it also helps them understand their view. And I found this to be the case, maybe you've noticed it as well, Kevin, in your conversations, that lots of people who raise objections to Christianity they don't understand their own objection. Because when you ask them, what do you mean by that, some version of that, you're going to get, dead air. Because they haven't really thought about they're repeating things they've heard other people say.
Clichés.
And so, and that's why these questions are so valuable, because the first step is just to get clarification on their view and help them to be clear about their own view.
Let's get on to the second step on the Columbo method, which seems to me to be more epistemological. Explain
epistemological
your perspective. How'd you get there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? In other words, what gives us confidence that the things we know are actually true? So this is the second step. The first step, you're asking some form of the question, what do you mean by that, to get clear on their view. The second step is you want to know why they think their view is true. So if somebody says, I don't believe in God, you ask, well, what do you mean by God? What kind of God don't you believe in? Blah, 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 whatever it is. And maybe they're just a full-on atheist. The second question I want to ask them is, well, why don't you believe in God? Or what are your reasons for not believing in God? Now, the key here, Kevin, is the principle of careful thinking is that the person who makes the claim has the obligation to defend the claim. So if a person, says, tells me there's no God, I don't have an obligation in this discussion to give him reasons why there is a God. I may be doing that later. But at this point, he's the one who made the claim against my view. And so it's his job to defend the claim he made.
Burden of proof. The burden of proof issue.
That's the burden of proof, exactly.
Okay.
And he has the burden or responsibility to prove the point that he's making. Now, if a Christian is going to tell him God exists, God is real, he's going to say, what makes you think that? Notice how the whole thing gets reversed. Now the Christian, he's asking the questions, and the Christian is in the hot seat, having to give all the reasons why. This is why Christians don't like to engage, because they feel they don't have all the answers. This approach changes the dynamic entirely. So the Christian is asking the questions, and then when the believer, because in the case where the non-believer is making the claim, you're getting clarification on the claim, and then you're asking for the reasons. Why do you think it's stupid to believe in God? Why don't you believe in God? Why do you think what you just described to me about the Bible being changed? Okay, I understand what you meant. Now, why do you think that actually happened? That's a whole different question. Now, I hope your listeners are getting the sense here, Kevin, and we've just talked a brief time about this, getting the sense that this is actually something they can do because it doesn't require them to know anything. Now, if you know something, you can be more direct and with your questions. This is the third step of the game plan, the third and final step. And when you want to make your own point, you're going to use questions to make your own point. Now, that's a little more advanced, okay? So you need to know some things. You need to know the point you want to make and how you want to prosecute that point in a persuasive way with the person. But you don't need to know anything for the first two steps. And part of the reason I gave the illustration about the waitress in Seattle is because, first of all, I made an impact in her life because, one, I was not even trying to. And secondly, I just asked the first question, clarification question. And it's amazing how many times when you just ask for clarification of a person's view, that you're going to start making an impact because they're going to have to think about it. And sometimes they're going to realize, man, maybe my view is not as good as I thought it was.
Exactly.
Let me give you one more example of the first question, just to give people confidence about how this can work. I had a gentleman come up a number of years ago at a conference, and it was a Christian conference, and he was a Christian. But he told me that he was personally against abortion, but he didn't think we should make laws against it. We shouldn't be telling other people how to live. Okay, is what it amounted to. That's called the modified pro-choice position. A lot of politicians have that view, okay? So there's a question, that's clarification question that I asked him right up front, that whenever anybody hears this point of view, always needs to ask, okay, you're personally against abortion, right? Yes. Why? That's all. I'm just getting clarification on his view. Why? And I asked him that, and he said, well, because I think abortion kills a baby. That's why I'm not. But I don't think we should be forcing our views on other people. So then I said, I'm just going to repeat your view back to you. And you tell me what you think about it. You actually genuinely believe that abortion kills a baby, and you think other people should be allowed to do that. Is that right? And he said, well, when you put it that way, I said, put it what way? That's your view. Yeah, exactly. I mean, unless I misunderstood, you're welcome to correct me, but I think that's what I just heard. So notice there, all I was doing was asking the clarification question, and in the process, taking the spin off of his view. Right. I wasn't going any further than that. That's how powerful this
It's interesting that they haven't really thought through it. I mean, they grab a cliche. They just think it's a cool cliche because others have used it. And then they don't really think through and say, oh, wait, I have a terribly inconsistent, incoherent perspective here. They haven't really thought through that. And I guess we're helping them.
They haven't. And this is true with so many things that people raise against Christianity, Kevin, that your listeners are going to run into. And so that's why this opening question is so easy. And by the way, you don't have to be committed to go the distance and go to the gospel. I mean, who knows where it's going to go? Yeah. You're taking the opportunity that you have that's just in front of you to what I call do a little gardening. It's not a harvest. It's gardening. You're trying to move somebody forward. And what I hope is going to happen in those kind of occasions, even if they're shorter, is that I may have done the way you, back to your jiggle word, maybe I've jiggled their worldview a little bit. Yeah. Maybe now they're going to be thinking, that's not as smart as an idea as I thought it was. And the Holy Spirit now is something to work with them on even when you're not there because you put that stone in their shoe.
And Greg, it seems to me that the unbeliever, and I think this applies to anybody, the people who believe in scientism, people who are committed to relativism, people who maybe the Eastern mystic who doesn't really see that there's any objective truth or even objective reality, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me that the unbeliever has committed himself to a position of uncertainty. Whereas, we come at it from a perspective of certainty. We have absolute truth, absolute certainty based on our worldview that God, who is the very source of truth, cannot lie, has conveyed this truth to me. Yeah. So we come at it from certainty. They come at it from uncertainty. And I think what you're doing, I'm just kind of coming up with this in the moment, so help me if this is wrong. But I think what we're doing is we're pointing out that they really are uncertain. That really there is a fairly high level of uncertainty as to whether or not there is any objective truth at all that undergirds their position. And this certainly applies to the field of ethics, where, do they have a standard for right and wrong? Well, kind of. Right. Well, not really, and you bring that out in the book as well.
Yeah, well, everybody knows there's a standard for right and wrong. They know it intuitively. It's built into them. And that's why they complain about the problem of evil. When people raise the problem of evil, they're not talking about things they don't happen to like. They are talking about things they think are actually wrong, even if the people who do them think they're fine. Okay, so everybody has a built-in objective morality motor going on. Francis Schaeffer called that moral motions, and but it's just there. Everybody knows something's wrong with the world. Doesn't matter when you lived or where you lived. Okay, and that's something we can draw on. By the way, I call that the inside out tactic. There are things that God built inside of us that are going to come out. Even when we're trying not to expose those, or when the things coming out are inconsistent with the worldview we're claiming. I want to go back to this certainty issue, though, because I think you're on a point, but I would use a different word. Okay. Because some Christians don't have 100% certainty, but and that's not what I'm shooting for with Christians. What I'm shooting for is confidence. In fact, the first line of our mission statement at Stand to Reason is confidence for every Christian. Confidence. We have good reason to be really confident. Now, some Christians may look at all the evidence and say, man, I'm certain. I'm absolutely certain there's no possibility I can be wrong. Good for them. But not all Christians will get to that level. But the more that we understand about the truth and the evidence for the truth of Christianity, the more confidence we're going to have. Now, the non-Christian oftentimes has confidence in their view too. But when we start asking questions, it's meant to kind of poke a hole in that confidence and let the air go out, to show them that they really don't have any good reason for confidence. Now, many of them are not confident. They're not certain. They don't know. And they're doing the best they can. But what's driving their views is not an assessment of the world the way it really is. What's driving their views is their desires. Well, this is what I want. I want to live this way. I want to be free. You do you. I mean, what's that all about? That's the ethic of our age. And what's at the center is whatever a person wants to do, they get to do, is the idea. And so that's when our questions hopefully are going to maybe challenge that narcissistic point of view, and maybe they don't have it right. So there's a range of confidence levels or even certainty levels that we'll encounter with non-Christians, but the questions can be very, very effective to, take the wind out of their sails, and this is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, as you approach the ethics argument, will the unbeliever come to the point at which they can say that genocide is certainly wrong, or that stealing my iPhone is certainly wrong? And then what is the basis upon which they will defend that position? Do they even say it's certainly wrong or absolutely wrong? And would they have any basis upon which to defend that position?
Yeah, what they do is the way they express the view, they express their confidence and certainty in it. Okay, but it's generally, sometimes it might be genocide. Well, what was going on, according to many, with Hamas and the Palestinians, et cetera, in Israel, they would use that word to describe it. Now, what's curious is these are people, and this is kind of your point. These are people that maybe in a whole bunch of other things are going to be relativistic. They're going to say, hey, who are you to push your morality on me? Yeah. And so they're speaking as if there's no objective morality. However, they're going to look at something that, to their appearances at least, I don't think genocide was going on there, but to their appearances, that thing is actually wrong. And so now they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. On the one hand, they're claiming to be relativists, but then they can't help but stating things in an objectivist or an absolutist kind of way when it comes to morality. And that's the inside out part. And I always also call this a suicide tactic, because they're speaking two different things at the same time that compete with each other. So what's it going to be? You can be a relativist, but you can't complain about genocide. In the Bible, for example. You can complain about genocide, but you can't be a relativist. So what's it going to be? I mean, that's the question I would ask them. Do you see the conflict there? And by the way, this is the third step of the game plan, where we see a problem and we're asking a question of them to help them to see the problem of the conflict in their own view. And this is to get them thinking once again.
What's your favorite go-to on the third tactic? What's your
third step?
Third step. Is it the area of ethics? Is that typically the best way to go?
I think I really like that one. People have asked me what my favorite argument for God is, and I think it's the moral argument. It's a very simple argument. It can be stated very simply. If there is no God, there's no objective morality.
Right. Dostoevsky.
But there is objective morality.
Really, Dostoevsky. What he said, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. If there's no God, then all things are permitted. That's Dostoevsky. But there is objective morality. Therefore, there is a God.
And they know it. And they know it. And you're speaking to it. And there's a little guy inside of them going, "He's right. He's really right."
Yeah. Well, the thing that carries the weight here for me is the second premise, which there is objective morality, because the problem of evil is evidence that morality is objective. Now, this does raise questions that people have regarding God, a good God, a powerful God allowing evil, but that's a separate question.
It is, right.
If there is no God, there would not be any problem of evil, because the word evil and good would have no meaning. There wouldn't be any standard by which you can measure by. And so that's why I think it's such a powerful argument, because everybody knows that ultimately, even when they deny it, that morality is objective because of their complaint of the problem of evil. And so that the ethical point is a good one, I think. Those who deny God, I'm going to ask some questions about their views about behaviors that they clearly think are wrong. And many times they'll offer those, well, you should push your morality on me. Why not? Now, they can't say because it's wrong, because they don't believe in that kind of thing. Once when a guy said that to me and I said, is that your morality? He said, yes. I said, then why are you pushing it on me right now?
It's coming back on me, right? I feel it right now.
Yeah, so, right. So there it was. He was conflicted. He didn't know what to say at that point. And it wasn't a nasty argument. It was. He said, no, you got me all confused. I said, no, you were confused when you began.
Yeah.
You started on this. But that's what I want to help them to see, that their own views are conflicted and they've got to rethink some things if they're going to be intellectually honest.
Is our goal to get to the gospel? I mean, eventually, I think one of the apologists that I studied, he would say something like, always be willing to buy the next cup of coffee, continue the conversation as much as you can. Yeah, that's
good. I'd not heard that phrase before, but I think that's a good one.
Yeah.
I think the goal is to move them towards the gospel.
Yeah.
In any given conversation, that may not be the case. And this is where I make the distinction between gardening and harvesting. Look, I became a Christian during the Jesus movement, and the emphasis there was, hey, get to the gospel, get to the gospel, get to the gospel. But it's interesting when you look at Jesus' parable of the sower, and in Matthew 13, he's explaining the parable to his disciples. And the first seed that goes on the road that gets taken away by the devil, he said, this is the seed that gets sown, the message gets sown, and people don't understand it. I'd never noticed that phrase in there in Matthew 13 before. People don't understand it. And so my concern is a lot of times people don't understand what we're saying or don't understand why it makes any sense at all. And so Francis Schaeffer used to call this pre-evangelism. Gardening is what I call it. And I think we have to do more of that gardening. Now, we can keep gardening as long as a person's willing to listen and then maybe get to the point of the gospel. And I usually try to, if I'm heading that direction, I'm going to try to get the bad news out on the table. Yeah, there is a morality, and guess what? You and I both know we don't keep that.
That's right.
And we violate it all the time, which means we're guilty. Now what? Now we're guilty before God. What are we going to do now? And so then move towards the good news based on the bad news. So that is always the ultimate goal with a person, but it may not be the ultimate goal of the individual conversation. It just depends on the person and where they're at in the process. And this may be the first time their balloon is pricked, so to speak, and the air starts going out.
Exactly. And keep in mind, Paul plants, Apollos waters.
Yes,
so you may be
go.
the Paul, you may be the Apollos. God's bringing forth the increase, but it just, I guess wherever we happen to be, we want to be faithful, and maybe we're just taking it, first step.
Yeah, Kevin, the concern that I have, if people think that they are obliged to get to the gospel in every conversation and interfaith or a spiritual conversation, they're not going to get in the conversation. They're just going to sit on the bench because that's too daunting for them. But if they think of themselves not going for a harvest, swinging for the fences, mixing the metaphors there, but rather doing gardening, well, this is where the game plan with the questions is going to be so helpful, because they'll get off the bench and they'll see it's not as hard as they thought. And then once they're in the field doing some gardening, all kinds of opportunities present themselves in a fairly simple way, and it becomes more doable by the average Christian. And I wanted to get those Christians off the bench. Yeah.
And if you look at Acts 17 and Paul's up in Mars Hill, he doesn't actually spend a great deal of time on the gospel. I think he mentions the resurrection towards the end. But, most of it is really preparing and getting some basic foundational issues taken care of.
Yeah, by the way.
And I'm sure the conversation continued later, but...
Yes, that's right. But I'm glad that you brought that particular instance up, because he does give the bad news there.
Yeah.
He says he's appointed a man who will be a judge of all, having produced evidence through the resurrection. And it turned out some people did believe as a result of that. So there must have been some other content in there that related to that. But it's interesting what Luke records is this broader conversation where he's gardening and he's trying to kind of get into their mindset and speak their language, quoting the Epicurean philosophers. And then he gives the bad news. Yeah. And the evidence for the truth of Christianity, and that is the resurrection. And that's where they began to scoff at him, but some followed, and he had opportunity to address that afterwards.
And the conversation continued, and they kept buying more cups of coffee. And I guess that's the way it went with the Apostle Paul.
But yeah, I got you.
In Athens.
Now it's Starbucks.
Yeah, exactly. No Starbucks back then. The book is Tactics, Game Plan for Discussing Your Christian Convictions. Great book, great summary. And friends, this is not intimidating at all. This is a small paperback. It's a power punch. It's got a lot contained in just these 220 pages. Highly recommended. Greg Koukl's been my guest on this edition of the program. And it's Stand to Reason is the ministry, str.org. And I apologize, Greg, I've never been to your website. I'm like, wow, there's a lot here. str.org is there. And then also, don't forget the realityapologetics.com is the Student Apologetics Conference. And yeah, wow, thousands upon thousands are attending these conferences now. It's realityapologetics.com.
Incidentally, we have one coming up in Dallas in February, and Philly in March, and then in April in Southern California.
Fantastic. All throughout the U.S. Friends, I know we're talking to thousands of families. I'm sure you're living somewhere close to one of these conferences. Highly recommend. realityapologetics.com is where you want to go to sign up for that conference. And my guest again, Greg Koukl, on this edition of the program. And grab the book Tactics, available anywhere online. Hey, Greg, thanks so much. Wow, it's been great. We just barely scratched the surface of a very big topic today.
It's been fun, Kevin. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. This has been a production of the Generations Media Network. For more information, go to generations.org/media.